Nancy and I live in Texas in the winter, and we come up to Cooperstown. We have for years in the summer. And about 2 years ago, I joined Otsego 2000, which was an advocacy group over there. And I think because of my accent, they said I was going to be in charge of the Natural Gas Committee. And at the time, I really didn't think it was such a bad idea. I mean, because I'd been investing in oil and gas for 30 years up until about 2006. And I was a planning manager at Atlantic Richfield until they fired me back in the 70s. So, but what I found was in this sort of semi-official capacity at Otsego 2000 is that a lot of things that I took for granted in Texas just didn't apply up here. And a lot of things that did apply or that would work in Texas really probably won't work up here. And the more I looked at it, the more I realized that it's got some real problems. And I think Aaron hit the nail on the head, and that Julie Huntsman over in the town of Otsego and Kelly Brannigan, who you're going to hear from in a minute, in Middlefield figured out that probably the most effective way to deal with this, since the EPA has been fracked out of the Clean Air and Water Act and the DEC is kind of, comatose, is that you really need to take control of this at the local level. And I mean that, and I know this is the 8th forum, but frankly, I hope it's the last one, because I think you need to get out there and get those petitions signed and get those New Berlin and Norwich and whatnot. You need to get these ordinances enacted, and you need to do it pronto. And if you don't believe me now, just wait. I'm not going to go into how fracks happen to good people, but I found it just recently. There's something on mybrainshark.com there at the bottom called "Fracking the Food Chain." It's really a very good slide show put together by the Applegates that basically explain how horizontal hydrofracking of shale is done. And the industry has slideshows on this too, and they go into the technicalities of it. And the Applegates do go through the technicalities, but they also address the problems that the industry either ignores in their presentations or they just gloss over. And by the way, the thing that the epiphany for me on this is that we went to a county meeting. In fact, Jane Penrose was there, I don't know, a year and a half ago. And I spoke, and I realized that when everybody else spoke that I knew more than anybody in the room, which whoa. And it's because, it's the one-eyed man in the line of the blind. They didn't know anything about this technology, and I knew just enough to invest in it. Lou Alstad over there knows a good bit about it. And that's really when I got active, because I realized that if it was as little as I know, it was more than most of the people around here. And of course, the industry knows everything that I'm going to tell you. They just won't tell you. This stuff, people tell you this has been done for 80 years and 100,000 wells. Well, actually, they were still trying to figure this out back in '69, the Atomic Energy Commission. And I think it was ERDA, Energy Research and Development Administration. In Rulis, Colorado, they tried to frack the Mancos Shale with, I think it was either 27 or 32 megaton bomb. And of course, the frack worked, but the gas was too hot. And this is sort of emblematic of the mentality, is that the people that do this are thinking in terms of the geology and in the technology, and they're not thinking about the consequences. There haven't really been any consequences to think about in some of these environments. They're kind of xeric. And this is really, this is emblematic of it. it didn't even dawn on them that after they vitrified the shale, that the gas was going to be radioactive. So now the DOE, as a successor to ERDA, is going to have to babysit that well for the next 20, 30,000 years. And so in the 80s, Halliburton, among others, developed horizontal hydrofracking. The first one that I was aware of in business was when they fracked the Austin Chalk, which was an oil formation. And then George Mitchell, Georgios Mikolos from Galveston, Texas, fracked a gas well up in about 81, probably in the Barnett. And then so the technology is fairly recent anywhere, including Texas. The problem is, and again, symptomatic of that atomic bomb. It's just happened. That's mainly the difference, of course, is the amount of fluids that are involved. I guess that's the fundamental difference between that and a conventional vertical frac. And also because of the frac technology has evolved. It used to be just water. In fact, Lou Allstat remembers back in West Texas when it was nothing but water. And I don't know. But for some reason they continue to dope the fracking fluid with more exotic chemicals until now they won't even tell you what's in the chemicals. I don't know whether Texas just passed the first state law to require that, or I don't know whether the bill passed or not. It's pretty far along, which is kind of ironic because that's when most of that stuff is mixed, is, like what's in it. And it's funny, you go to these, or you hear these industries, like they say hydrochloric acid. Well, that's what's in your stomach. But, of course, when it comes up, that's acid reflux, and then you kiss your esophagus goodbye. Evidently, the Marcellus is particularly rich in radium-226. The DEC tests indicate that the frac flowback had pretty high concentrations of 226. The New York Times study on in the Pennsylvania outflow indicated that it's there in the processed sludge. The one that intrigues me is radon. Radon, the molecular weight of radon is very similar to propane. So the problem is when you separate the liquids out of the raw gas, the propane, the butane, the ethane, the radon will piggyback onto the propane. So you're trying to strip the propane out in the field, and that if you don't know what you're doing, the radon will go along with it because it's similar enough. When the centrifuge, it comes with it. The problem with that is that then now you've got radon, and you also have ethane. And you're just like, what are you going to do with it? And guess what? They're going to open the valve. So if you go by a gas processing plant, of which there would be thousands, like one every half mile or something, and I'm not exaggerating, just don't breathe. You'll be okay. And the other thing, that this is something that Nancy and I, we live on the edge of the on the Barnett. Well, hell, we live in the middle of the Marcellus. And this is something that I don't know if we take this for granted, but the truck traffic involved in cumulatively over a large area is just unbelievable. In fact, it's like, your life with trucks, kind of. And of course the problem is that these guys are running fast because they're getting paid by the load. The drivers may be paid by the hour, but they're basically doing this on a contract basis. So they got to get this stuff, and this includes going to the well to bringing drill pipe to the well. They're going 24/7 when they're drilling. They're in a hurry. They're always in a hurry, and they have to keep something. They got to take something to stay awake other than coffee, so it can get pretty hairy. And of course, you'll hear some horror stories if you heard. In Pennsylvania, the number of truckloads ranges in estimates anywhere from like 600 to like 1,200. That's per lateral, and so and a well pad here would have as many as 8 laterals. So it adds up. And if you live on the route, and of course if you're in the middle of a field, everybody's on the route. So all this stuff goes by your house or your car or whatever, like all the time. Well, I can skip through that. We just photoshopped some trucks. And I got in trouble with this. Somebody I go on these, pro drilling sites, and they said, well, that's not that's Cooperstown, the bridge. And I said, well, yeah, of course it's like not real because, they're earning it. That's not happening yet. And of course, the label on the Mac is backwards too. This is a Frac Tech truck, by the way. And that's only 4 trucks that's on there. Now, we had a friend, or actually not a friend, but a neighbor down at the ranch whose son was on this rig, and he survived. He got burned, but this is some interesting things about this. This is a Deepwater Horizon, / BP blowout, and the Gulf, and it blew at about 8,000 psi, meaning it blew at less pressure. The surface casing blew out at less pressure than it would take to frack some of these Marcellus wells. And this is a multi-million-dollar frack job and drilling job. So and of course guess who? Well, the culprit was Halliburton. Halliburton did the surface casing, cementing on it, and it blew out. Now, and the lesson here, though, is a couple of things. Is that, since 2005, there has been no EPA oversight on any of this. So the only federal oversight was the minerals management that leased the land, leased the mineral rights, and there wasn't anything beyond that. There was a similar blowout, which I referenced down there, the Piper Alpha in the North Sea. It happened, I think, in '76. 167 guys went down when it blew up. And what the Brits figured out is that they should separate the permitting agency from the environmental agency. But at that time, you go and you get your permit from one source and whatnot. And what the Brits did was they basically bifurcated that, which is the way most states do it. Is you have an environmental agency like the DEC here in New York, and then you've got a separate agency, a minerals agency, that actually issues the permits. And as we say in Louisiana, that just complicates the payoffs royally if you have to do that. But if you don't do that, then you have this. And Chris, what happened here, is that the technology got ahead of the ability to put out to cap the well. In the case of it was too deep. In the case of a problem, there wasn't any way to address it. So the fact is that this is like a lesson for New York State, because the permitting agency is the same as the environmental agency, and that is, that's like a Texan's dream. It's like one check does all, but that's going to lead to major problems. The only other state I know that does that is the DEP over in Pennsylvania. Surprise. This again, there is an article the Duke study was in Scientific America, and the industry will admit to say 25% methane migration, with up to a mile. The Duke study was 1,500. No, it was a kilometer. They found 85% elevated levels of methane, and there's better, I think, even in that study I referenced. But it's real simple. I mean, what happens here is that as soon as you spud the well, you're going to start putting pollution into the groundwater. I mean, you drive the trucks in, it's going to start polluting the groundwater. The reason why that's not a problem in Texas is because there is no groundwater. It's it's kind of a sick joke, but there's not, there are no wells. There are no shallow wells. So this has not been a problem in Texas because there isn't the monitoring, if you will, of all those shallow wells, because there aren't any shallow wells, not in the Barnett anyway. So of course what happens is that as soon as you drill the well bore is open, so anything that you're doing in it, the circulating drilling fluid, whatnot, is going to expose whatever is down there, the drilling chemicals itself, and any methane that's mobilized into an open well bore that's uncased. So the drilling fluid is going to bring any methane right back up into the surface, right up into the aquifer. So the pollution will start as soon as it starts turning right, as we say. That's and within a day or two, that's going to end up in somebody's water well, the drilling mud. By the way, drilling mud up until about '86 had it's coolant for the drill bit, which is really a grinder. It's not a bit per se. And they used to put, to cool it down, they'd put asbestos in it. So consider yourselves lucky. The other phenomena in Texas and Arkansas is that the disposal wells and possibly the fracks themselves precipitate earthquakes. There's been 2 in the Barnett, like 4.5s or something, and never been an earthquake there, since the Pleistocene or the Triassic or whatever. There's been hundreds, if not thousands, in the Fayetteville Shale in Arkansas. I mean, it's even been on, what's that? There was an ABC News. They even did a show on that, and the cameras caught the one of these earthquakes when they're happening. The problem in New York is Texas is seismically inert, at least the Barnett is. New York is not seismically inert. Portions of it, there are earthquakes, and if there haven't been any around here lately, then just wait, because that's going to happen. And that'd be an interesting for Janet Barth. The cumulative effect of 3.5 earthquakes every 45 days for the next 1,000 years. goodbye drywall. This is a great lie. I love this one. Even T-Bone Pickens he recited this lie on National Public or whatever he was. This is something that go figure, a Halliburton engineer wrote for the Oil and Gas Journal about a year and a half ago. And the deal is, and you hear this, I heard this at that county meeting that you were at, Jane, and it's the deal. The deal goes like this: my water well is way up here, and the shale is way down there, and so I'm protected. And there's this guy Scott Klein. He goes around telling people this. I mean, T-Bone said this. Well, of course, the problem is that all the pollution that could possibly happen, the fracking chemicals, the flow back, the trucking, the drilling, it all is going to end up. It either starts on the surface or it ends up on the surface. So there's no the depth. I mean, it could be 20,000 feet deep. That's no protection because the vulnerability is the surface. And, there aren't any trout down there in the Devonian. So, they're safe. This is the best thing I could find on the internet, but basically the water level in a typical aquifer well in Texas is going to be 1,000 feet down. And so in a sense that gives it some protection. It certainly gives it protection from any groundwater infiltration. Of course, up here that's not the case. They're all shallow wells, so they're all prone to being polluted by methane or chemicals or whatnot. The only well water pollution I could find in the Barnett was sort of fluke because people were basically pulling water out of the Brazos River. So they were shallow gravel wells out of the Brazos, and they were polluted with methane and fracking chemicals. And if there had been more wells that are shallow in Texas, then there'd be thousands of incidents. But when you hear this thing, there was an article in the Times-Union today by a friend of mine, a guy named Bernard Weinstein, and he was saying, there aren't any incidences of groundwater pollution in Texas. Well, that's not true, because the EPA cited rains on those Palo Pinto County wells. But Bernard, come on. There's no groundwater to pollute. Nobody's complaining because there aren't any of these shallow wells. So it's a bogus argument. And yet they trot it out. This is just a summary. This is kind of, where I kind of saw the light. I looked on the DEC test how many disposal wells there are in the state. There's not none. There's 8, and only 4 of them are operative, and none of them will take this stuff. In Texas, you have to take the fracking flow back and stick it back down into a disposal well. If you're in a seismically inert area like Texas, maybe that's not such a bad idea. If you're in Arkansas, maybe that's not such a great idea, because it's evidently those frack waste disposal wells that are greasing faults that are causing earthquakes. So, but the point is that you can't just take this stuff and dump it on the road in Texas. You got to make it disappear from the surface of the earth. We already talked about this. The Environment Agency's got to be totally separate from whoever issues those permits, because I guarantee you, whoever issues those permits is going to get paid off. The story on that Deepwater Horizon well is that they got that permit for the price of 2 Super Bowl tickets. I mean, that came from someone who would know, because that's the kind of stuff I did. I used to own interest in offshore oil rigs and land rigs, but nothing as big as the Deepwater Horizon. But obviously there's a big difference in the topography. And that's part of the problem up here. Particularly the raininess, and of course we talked about the depths of the wells. Lakes in Texas are all owned by municipalities. They're owned by either the water itself or the lake itself is owned by some municipal water authority. So in a sense, they're all as if they are they're the same legal structures if it's the New York City reservoir. So if the town of Fort Worth wanted to let you drill underneath their lake, they might, but it's their water. And if you were going to frack or drill a well, you'd have to go to them because they own the shoreline. The lake that Nancy and I live on, they own the shoreline right up to our house. So It's a jurisdictional thing, and so in New York, the only lakes effectively that have that kind of protection of being where the owner of the water has control of the water source is New York City. And of course, they got a carve out in these proposed regs. New York and Texas are and Pennsylvania, two of the only places on the planet, on the earth, that don't tax gas production. I mean, like Libya, 100%, Mexico, 100%, Venezuela, 100%, New York, 0, Pennsylvania, 0, Alaska, between 15 and 25%, Texas, 7.5%, and these are states like Texas. These are like the reddest of all the states, and no state income tax or anything. There's a problem with other obvious problem if you don't tax it is you have no money to enforce. The state has no money out of this at all. And the other problem that people don't think of is there's nobody out there looking at the wells. There's nobody out there reading the meters because they're not getting any money out of it. That's not good. And and effectively in Texas, the employment is 100%. I mean, there's 100% of the people employed in the industry are from Texas. Here and in Pennsylvania, it's basically 0 to start, and that would come up a little bit. But I'm telling you something, as long as some guy in, Piedras Negras or Querétaro wants to work at 4 in the morning for, $10 an hour, good luck. People will come here from out of state and out of the country to do this. And the only permanent employment of this kind of industry anyway is the pumper, is the guy that go out there and babysits the wells or would babysit a compressor station. So over a longer period of time, it's not a high employment, permanent job type industry. It's a mobile. And we're going to talk about this ad nauseum. This compulsory integration law in this state is just reeks. I did a PowerPoint on this for economics. So basically, the way it's set up is most of the money just goes out of the state. And I mean, there's a lot of obvious reasons because the company is owned from, it's a Canadian company or Norway or these wells are owned by limited partnerships. So they're not paying New York State corporate income tax. They're not New York State companies. They're just separate LPs. So they're going to get paid the 3.5% LP tax. All the suppliers, are in Tomball or in Ardmore or whatever. So all the hardware, all that money goes out of the state, and frankly, a lot of the salaries are going to go out of the state. Down to San Luis Potosi or someplace. The SGIS is basically just a rehash of the GEIS, which was gamed, years ago. And the new one, the last 2 iterations of it indicate it. The first one, it said that you could drill a well 50 feet from a shoreline, because that's what the original GEIS said. And then they, after all kinds of 10,000 whatever hearings, and then they moved that to 150 feet. Great. We'll talk about compulsory. This water withdrawal law, I don't know if it passed today or not, but it also amazes me. In Texas, you can't take out 25,000 gallons or more a day from your own property. And they just did a law, I think they may have passed, where you can take 100,000 gallons a day out of the state lakes for free without a permit here. And what I pointed out, is that any knucklehead from A&M could figure the way the law is written is that you could show up with 10 different trucks, 10 owner-operators, and you could pull 1 million gallons, out for nothing. It's like, wow. It's like a Texan's dream, which probably explains most of this, a lot of it. We'll talk a little bit about, we'll sort of skip over this, but obviously the decline curves of these things are really steep. And the problem that presents for ad valorem tax valuation is that in most townships, each township has got their own tax appraiser. So there's 14 of them in Otsego County. They're not going to understand how to value these wells. They're based on the ad valorem evaluation of the gas produced. But if they don't get it right, in the first 24 months, on the tax rolls, then it's like it's gone, in terms of how it would show up on a tax roll. In Texas, the county would have a uniform. All the towns, the cities would use one appraisal organization. They have their lawyers, they have their geologists. They wouldn't let this happen. Here a lot of these wells are going to be blips on the tax rolls, if that. I started adding this up, and so the first two I put like, who are the losers, like you, who are the winners, like somebody else, because that's kind of sums it up. It certainly would. I mean, in most towns, that pretty well sums it up. You've heard the horror stories. The motels will make money. The bars will make money. Whoever's selling the best speed in town will make money, etc. From a site specific standpoint, from a township standpoint, when they come and say there's not going to be, there will be a lot of jobs, and over time there would be a lot of jobs in the state. But in terms of anybody and anybody that lives in your town, the fact is if you got a job doing this, the first thing that would happen is that you would leave town. Or if not the first thing, the second thing that would happen. The only way that you would stay in town is if you were a pumper, is if you were babysitting some wells. Basically, from a tax standpoint, whether or not this is a winner or a loser on the tax rolls is probably a function of the population density. And like, for instance, if we're out in West Texas, I wouldn't be talking to y'all because we all have oil wells and no villages and whatnot. But the catch here is that if the ad valorem tax from the wells is not greater than the reduction in the real estate property taxes, then it's a net loser. And we're going to quantify that. But so in other words, your house, it's like a guarantee. You saw the trucks. Your house value goes down, your property values goes down. And that offsets that increase, those blips, if they're caught, of the ad valorem tax value on those wells. I'm going to do a whole presentation on this, but it puts it in terms of what the property tax income is. There's other costs, and that's the economists like Janet Barth can quantify those. The DEC is just sort of outgunned on this. Because we see EPA is out, New York got out, and again, I'm reiterating what you have to do. You stop having forums and go out and sign petitions and get these towns to act. And Julie's going to talk about that in detail. Same thing. And if they don't respond, you got to run for town board. You got to run for county. You've got to take over. There's more of you than there are, penny stocks from Canada or Norwegians. So, some people, they show up and say, well, 5,000 acres are leased and like 13% of you. Well, how many of those leases can vote? I mean, I don't think they can't even vote in Texas. The SGEIS is one of the things that it doesn't do is it basically ignores local land uses. If you went to go get a mining permit, you'd be subject to local zoning laws. The SGEIS, the way it's written, it has setbacks, obviously, like 100 foot from a house, 200 foot from a well. But it's blind to what happens on the surface, to the land use. And we're going to go over that real quick. The other thing, the evil twin of this is New York's compulsory pooling law. We'll talk about that in a minute. I'm going to go. This is something people don't talk much about, but I'm going to talk about why oil fields are unitized. They originally unitized the oil fields. They made people participate in a well because in the olden days, everybody would go drill their own well on little bitty pieces of property and would tap a common pool. And that's a fire hazard, and it's not a good thing to do. So what they would do, in other words, you'd have an oil reserve, and this is sort of imprecise language, but the oil wells would drain that common reserve. So you'd end up with like too many oil wells in some places like Burke-Burnett. In like 1914, the whole town just blew up because there was just too many derricks too close together. And plus it wasn't doing the reserve any good. So what you do is you unitize that mineral rights interest, and just bear with me, there's a punchline here, so that you end up with one well with this common pool of those unitized property owners. Those started out as the surface owners. Okay, so far so good. So most states, that's 30 some odd states, have got unitization slash, that's the goal, is the unitization. They call it forced pooling, compulsory integration. Compulsory pooling is what, if the owners can't get together and decide to do that, then the state agency can come in and adjudicate that. There's obviously reasons the state says, just not to opt into a forced pooling, and one of them is environmental. The other one is economics. I mean, the terms for the majority may not be good terms. You don't want to get in it. So, but here's the catch: shale gas doesn't pool. It doesn't. In other words, the only area that the shale gas well is the area that the frack touches, if you will. And Tony and Graffy would be groaning, when I talk like this. So if you drill a shale gas well vertically, it's not going to drain very much area. So the net effect of it is, if you apply compulsory integration, compulsory pooling to horizontal wells, then you're basically just giving the driller, under the auspices of the DEC, who does this, the right to just run that lateral under somebody's land that wouldn't have been drained by that well at all. And what that does is it just gives them, the gas company, the right to steal the mineral rights underneath somebody else's house and pollute their gas well and whatnot. So then I looked at what the minimum well space. Well, the DEC is proposing 640 acres, which is a square mile, which is known as a section. And again, the natural area from a vertical frac would be, I don't know, maybe 10 acres or 20 acres. So this is an order of magnitude larger than what the unitization reason or rationale would be. And then you wonder, why is it 640 acres? And from a compulsory pooling standpoint, all that really does is that gives the Norwegians the right to go drill those laterals under other people's property. I mean, it's just that simple. And it gives the DEC the right to go compel those other mineral rights owners into that well. It's illegal. I mean, so far as I can tell. And guess when it was written? It was written the same year that Halliburton fracked the EPA out of the Clean Water Act in 2000. That's New York wrote their obviously this is not coincidental. I mean, they knew what they were doing. They knew what was going to happen. They were going to make it so that 60% of the owners can force the other people into a well, even though there's no geological reason to do it. So you get 384 acres. And the adjacent 256 acres get pushed into the well. And I mean condemned, because it's literally condemning their mineral rights interest into that common ownership of the well. And that, of course, that means that that lateral is going to go all sorts of odd places. There's a great article about this in ProPublica, forced pooling. And this is written about a couple, actually, that were forced into an Anschutz well that was a vertical shale well. And, that's in New York State by the DEC. I mean, if they'll do it on that, once they start running these laterals, they just push anybody into a well. So this is what it does to land use. Remember, the SGIS is blind to surface uses, to land use. And you've got this really, not maybe the worst compulsory law in the United States, but certainly one of the worst, because some oil and gas states have no compulsory pooling. They say, if you don't want in, just God bless you, but not here. So this is what happens. Okay, so you remember you can spud a well 150 feet of a lake. The state owns all the lakes, so the state leases the land under the lake. The well is 150 feet from the lake. So for some reason, the state needs more lands to make their, quote, 640 acre spacing. Well, guess what? Well, then this DEC goes back and it compels the shore owners, the adjacent owners, the village, the mobile station the Exxon mobile station, into the well. And under New York state law, that's perfectly legal. And guess what? That's exactly what will happen. I guarantee you, that's what they're going to do. The other thing that they could do, again, if you have no land use controls, if you have no land use ordinance, and your well permitting regs are blind to land use, then this is what happens. And you've got this really groovy compulsory pooling law. Is it so? Okay, so now, so a subdivider goes out, subdivides the land, sells the surface land, for houses. Everybody drills a little shallow water well. The developer keeps the mineral rights. You think, oh, hello. Well, that's what happens in Texas. You develop land, you sell and you keep the mineral rights. Okay, so now the developer turns around and leases the mineral rights to that Norwegian or that Canadian penny stock or the Texas gas company or the Oklahoma, and they come out and they spud a well right in the middle of the subdivision. It's, the law says it has to be like 100 feet from a house. Like, so what? The well pad's got to be 5 acres or something. Big deal. So it's a 5-acre lot. That's what happens if you don't have land use controls. That's what will happen in this town under the DEC regs and the compulsory pooling regs. Something just like that. Or spud a well right next to a subdivision. You just need 384 acres, and the DEC will deliver the remaining 256 on a plate. So that's what you need to do. You need to take control of this yourselves. You need to do it locally. I know it sounds like a cliche, but because nobody else is going to do it. You're going to have to take control in New Berlin and Norwich and these other towns, or you're going to have to get yourself a new town board. Let me say one thing. There was a clarification in the wording in Albany. I don't think it's going anywhere this session. I think it will come back next session. It may get passed. But the wording on the supersedence language for oil and gas regs over local zoning regs is not the best. It needs to be clarified. I think the courts will uphold it, as they have in Texas and in other states, that zoning trumps those drilling regs. That, in other words, the drilling of the state agencies can regulate drilling, but they can't that doesn't mean they can put a well, anywhere they want to, so to speak. But when that comes back around, you need to support the clarification of that. And let me say something about this home rule stuff. The key thing here is that there are so many unknowns about this, and the regulatory regime we already seen is so gamed, is so iffy, that you really the only responsible thing to do, in my opinion, is to take control locally. And if let's say everything goes rosy, they reduce the number of frac tucks from 1,000 to 10, and they use biodegradable organic frac fluid, blah blah blah. Well, then great. Then you can always change your mind. You can always amend the zoning law. But if you don't take control of that now, then you are at the mercy of all the crooked Texans and all the coked up whatever, and you have very little control over it. And so really the important thing is not whether you you're against this in perpetuity, but you want to get control over it now. Because frankly, if you don't get control over it now, the wells will get permitted, and once they're permitted, they're grandfathered. You can come in with zoning later, and if they permitted those wells, you're toast. Anyway, there's good land planners. Nan's a good one. Helen and David are good attorneys. They've both done PowerPoints on this. Julie's going to talk to you about how to get these petitions done. And I'm available for free pizzas. And that's it, people.
I have a little anniversary coming up. In 5 days, it'll be my 1-year anniversary of being an anti-fractivist. So, because that was when I saw Gasland. I had my doubts about this whole process. Someone in this crowd asked me, now, why did you get into this? And I said, I read a short description of it, and I think it was personal revulsion at the description of fracking. So anyway, Gasland kind of did it for me, sort of holy shamoly, and I had a lot of respect, do have a lot of respect for all of you out there who've been working on this for 2 or 3 years, okay? And while I was just, had my head in the sand and was like, oh, I want somebody else to take care of this, like the Sierra Club or something. But they're not, so it's up to us, and we've had a little bit of success in my neighborhood. So I will speak to you about how to prohibit fracking in your New York town. Okay. Okay, everybody knows this stuff. You've heard it from Chip several times. There's no doubt about it. It's heavy industry. It's pretty nasty. That's a really pretty gross picture there. I don't think that would draw a lot of tourists or people wanting to move into the area. I've been down to Pennsylvania several times, and I'm sure a lot of you guys have. I've got family that live down in State College, so we have the occasion to, when we go visit, go through these little gas lands, and I did get to see a flaring well once, and this was before my awareness was raised sufficiently, and I didn't know what it was, and neither did my husband. We figured it out. I mean, we're not stupid, but it was at night, so it was very dramatic. So we're going by, and I just said, "What is that? What is that?" I mean, it's not a factory. I mean, it looks like a rocket or something. It's like, oh, it's a flaring gas well. It looked really out of place in rural Pennsylvania. Okay, so fracking is unregulated in most towns. Again, if you don't have any land use controls, you're not in good shape here. So most towns don't have a comprehensive plan. That's exactly what the drillers want. It's a great setup, as you know. And so with the lack of those safeguards, it just sort of makes you a sitting duck. So who regulates fracking? Of course, the DEC. And we say they cannot regulate land use. I don't think they're in the business of doing that, and can't regulate road use. And Mr. Northrup here had something to do with this PowerPoint, which probably doesn't surprise anybody. And he made a point that the FAA, of course, can regulate aviation, but they can't just willy-nilly say, well, we're going to put an airport just wherever they want one. So, and again, this whole regulation thing to the industry-associated experts like Mr. Sovas, who does know a lot. I've heard him speak for over an hour about why towns cannot do this, that town of Otsego just did, and the town of Middlefield and the town of Springfield, and your towns are going to go. Ulysses, yeah. So I've heard, Kelly also has heard a lot about how we can't, all these reasons why we can't do it, and I just want to say, but I haven't said to him, Mr. Sovas, I just don't believe you, okay? And I get what you're saying, but I don't think it's right. So anyway, that's why we persist. And Kelly and I missed that part of the gas conference today. He was the lead speaker, and I decided to work a little later and sort of lollygag in and stuff, and so we did, and we missed his speech, but we'd heard it. Now, he's a smart guy. I just don't believe what he says. Okay, so prohibited fracking. So see the bottom there, your town here. It can be done. Now, when this slide was made, that wasn't true. We couldn't say that about town of Otsego, but on May 11th, they finally did their vote. They went through all the processes, all the procedures that they had to do, and we did it, and it was a very climactic moment, and they got a standing ovation. And when there was a little break in the action, I went around and shook all the town board members' hands, and one of them said, well, as I had shown up a number of times, like you folks have been doing to your town boards, and one of them said, okay, Julie, so what are you going to do now? Just like that. And I said, you know what, I'm not done. Thank you, I'm not done. Anyway, so, all right, this keeping frackers out of your town, educating your town. We had the opportunity to do that in town of Otsego, had a couple informational meetings in the fall of 2010, and then we started on the, okay, get her done, okay, this winter, from a real sense of urgency, and as a local activist, I didn't see it as my job to figure out how they were supposed to do it. That's their job, okay? My job was to demonstrate political will, okay? And that's what a lot of you folks are doing. Teresa is she's doing that in a big way. A lot of activists in Otsego County, and hopefully a lot of you here in Chenango County. So, now here's the deal. Get your town board to act or replace them. Well, Town of Otsego's board did act. But here's the thing. I don't think we're quite done. We've signed on with Delta. I don't know if that's sufficient as a little citizen here that's going to be affected by all this junk. Hopefully not. But I don't really understand how it all works, want to understand it, and I've asked our town board, the supervisor, well, what are the prospects of the town of Otsego getting a good road use plan? And she says, not with this board. They're saying, no more laws. No more laws. We've done enough work. We're done. And I'm being driven by fear here. I don't think we're quite done, so I'm going to run for town board. And got a lot to learn. All righty. Yes, that's right. Now you know. Okay. Educate. Presentation by anti-frackers. Yeah, you get people to come to these meetings, and so you start having a network of people that will help you do all this work, because it is a lot of work. This is not rocket science. I just sort of did this, and Middlefield was in the midst of doing this. We weren't really talking to each other. I think we were just bearing down and just doing our thing pretty quickly. I'm not the most organized person in the world. I know there are people who are doing this like better than I did it, but we got it done. And again, it's not that hard. A lot of you are doing, or I hope a lot of you are doing, or will be doing, petitions. Walking them around is certainly a great way to do it. It is a lot of work. Don't kid yourself. Teresa sort of took one for the team the other day via the jaws of a little dog with her walking around activism. But that's one way to do it. Town of Otsego, we did both. We did a walk-around petition and we did a mail-out petition, because I wanted to wake up Cooperstown, and I think we did. And we also did a phone survey, and a phone survey is really your fastest way to demonstrate political will. Okay, you can do it easily in a week's time. You get your list of registered voters, you divvy them up amongst your team, decide what your survey question is going to be, make it really simple, come up with some guidelines. Don't bother people during dinner time, that kind of thing. Don't try to persuade them, be friendly. Hi, my name is, I'm a resident here in Otsego County, if you didn't actually live in the town, and working with the group trying to determine how people feel about fracking. Would you be interested in answering a simple question? And so, if you put it like that, it's not really a big deal. So in maybe it was 9 days, okay, just a little over a week, we talked to 1,159 people. Okay, that was the actual number of phone contacts, all right? 945 indicated, most of them unequivocally, I am opposed to this, or I'm really worried about it, or I do have some significant concerns about this. And a concern, might be, well, gee, if they didn't use all those poisons, well, guess what? They do, okay? Until that's the law of the land, they can't do that. That's one thing about it. One of the things about it doesn't look like a good deal. So, phone survey, you can really demonstrate some political will pretty quickly. And that helped a lot, because I was able to say to the board, it was 81.5% of the people we talked to said we oppose this, or we got serious concerns. And almost to a person, the people helping out with this, and it was over 20 people, 5 or 6 of them work for Brewery Ommegang, which was nice. That helped out. They took a bunch of pages of the voter registration rolls. Anyway, almost to a person of the surveyors, they said, man, I hardly got any people that are in favor of this. And they're not just saying their word, they're saying no, they do not want it. So that was the feedback I was getting. So I did present that at a town meeting, and that was a pretty significant statistics. Of the petition, it was, we got between 1,300 and 1,400, which, and again, I've sort of framed this to the town board this way. Was it, every registered voter? Well, there's 2,645, I think. But, think about it. I said, look at this, all these people, and look at the numbers of people that have voted in the last 3 elections. Okay, the presidential election, I think it was like 1,600 people voted, something like that. Before that, it was like 1,100. Another time it was like 1,300. I said, look, we got more people to oppose fracking that even bothered to vote in the last election in this town. I think that's pretty significant. Okie doke. Alrighty, so simple stuff. You just get your registered voters from the Board of Elections. You keep a master copy, divvy it up, have people indicate, you know, how your responses, and tally them. And the thing that I did not do, and if I was doing it all over again, I would do, is basically what Teresa is saying, what Middlefield did so well, is be more organized about your actually petitioning the whole town. So you make a little check mark when your petition comes in and the phone survey comes in. But it wasn't a perfect process. That's all right. We got it done. You know, the letter, that was a bunch of work, but it was pretty cool, and I've got examples of it. Some of you have seen it. I can certainly email it to you. It's a cover letter. And on the back, there's a bullet points, a list of concerns. So it was a very substantive mailing. And we provided a brightly colored postcard for people to mail back. I had a P.O. box that I had established a few months prior for a pledge campaign, pledge not to lease your land. So I had that all ready. And it allowed people to make comments. And that was pretty cool. The comment part is really cool. I'm not saying you have to do it like that. It was a lot of work. I'm still getting cards. People are saying, oh, by the way, this was like too late for that March meeting. But, you know, I want to be counted. So they'll go into it. They'll go into the database. Okie dokie. When the meeting with supporters, there was a lot of time I was calling people, you know, friends. I mean, like, we're all worried about it, but sometimes you can think, well, you know, I don't have to go because somebody else is going. That's not a good way to think, okay? It's good to energize as many people as possible to come to the meetings. Our town board paid attention to that. Our supervisor was sympathetic to what we were doing, and she said, you know, they pay attention. They see bodies out there, they pay attention. It's not just the numbers you're presenting, but it's a presence, and that's all part of political will as well. And people that, for the very, very few folks who would come to the meetings in Otsego who were pro-fracking, you know, I was ready for somebody to ask me this, you know, like, question the legitimacy of what I was doing or something, and I never had to defend myself like that. In that way, but I wanted to say, look, it's a free country. You go out and you do this work. You can do it. I mean, you know, free speech, you got your opinion. You do your phone survey, okay? You do your petition and show us the results. You know, nobody paid me to do this. I've got better things to do. I just am really very attached and have a strong vested interest in pure water and air and my lovely home and my lovely town. So there. Anyway, but I never had to say that. So I did have one town board member challenge me on, well, he challenges everybody. He's an interesting fella, the whole community and the town board on how awful government is and that there should be no government. And he would read from the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence and the Federalist Papers and stuff, and I got up and I had my raw data. I had my box, my wooden box with all the little petition cards and stuff. His name's Carl, and I don't mean to beat up on Carl. He's an interesting guy. But I said, well, Carl, I actually think this is a very credible demonstration of democracy. And I think everybody that has signed these petitions and answered our phone survey saying they were opposed to drilling or very worried about it take as their certain inalienable rights clean water and clean air and the right to determine what kind of town they live in. I think that's a great demonstration of democracy. So he did not believe me, though, but that's okay. Okay. So anyway, there's my contact information. Peg Leon, along with Kelly, she's a major Middlefield neighbor, and they really got going when they had seismic testing in their neighborhood. You know, that was pretty motivating. People's, crockery jiggling around and stuff, and they're like, what the, So they got going. They talked to the town board, and they've done this in a very organized fashion, way more organized than me. Teresa's doing it way more organized than I did with groups. Yeah, they're being way smarter than I was, but that's okay. Kelly has a really simple handout. I've got one that's kind of wordier and parenthetical and all that stuff. If you want to take time and read it, I've got it. I think it's called How to Motivate Your Town or something. I don't know what it's called, but it's along these lines, how to keep fracking out of your town. And Kelly's, or rather Peg's, whatever, it's the Middlefield recipe. And it's only 1 page, and it's really cool. If y'all haven't heard Lou Alstat, he's really cool too. Consummate gentleman. Okay, all righty. Go get busy. Anything I can do to help anybody, you just let me know. Looks like you got a lot of towns here, so who's going to be the first?